In today's video, I'm going to show you how I make the Waves and Wild Superstar bra, including a couple alterations like with straight straps, and I added a little bit extra coverage in the front and put in clear elastic to make it nursing friendly. So if you're interested to see how I do that, just keep on watching. In order to have the least amount of fabric waste with this pattern, I cut it in single layers. So I'll cut one this way and then I'll turn the pattern over to cut the other one. And so here is the arrow that denotes which way you want your stretch going. And that is going to be perpendicular to the grain line. So how I check that is I put my clear ruler on top so that the line is right there straight on the arrow. And then I look through it. I don't know if you'll be able to see this on camera at all, but I can see the grain line right here is perpendicular, or rather it's parallel to the lines going the other way. So this is just how I confirm that I have this funny shaped pattern piece actually laying straight along the grain line. So I have my stretch arrow and it's perpendicular with the grain line. Here I've got my main fabric laid out, and since it's not already a strange shape, I'm just cutting it on the fold here, and the back fits nicely in this area, so that's good. And I just have it folded down along the grain line. I use the same ruler trick to confirm that this is perpendicular to the grain line. And then I use these washers that I got from Home Depot to weigh it down. And I'm just going to use my rotary cutter and cut these out. And I just wanted to also highlight right here is where I've altered the pattern, because I have tried it on and it needed a little more coverage in the front. So this is actually a piece of paper I taped on and then cut. So I'm just adding that little bit of extra coverage at the front. All right, so the first step is to attach the fronts to the back for the lining and the main fabric. So I take this, I make sure that I'm looking at the grain line, which is the front, and so I'll put these right sides together. And I will sew down these edges, and the same here. So I'm going to use my serger and not trimming off anything basically. I will attach these 4 seams. All right, so now I have the fronts and backs joined together, and I'm going to attach the darts. So this is a really important part that you want to take your time with, or else you'll end up with weird pointy boobs. So you can use a washable pen if you want, to kind of draw along the line you're going to be stitching. Basically, you want to be starting a 1/4 inch out at the bottom, and then it gets closer and closer and closer to the edge, so that when you get to the very tip, your needle goes straight through it and just trails off. So I'm going to show you on this one first. You put it right sides together, and you want to make sure that you have the point exactly folded. You want it folded exactly at the point. So if you would like to, you can draw like this. I guess my pen is kind of low on ink here, but the idea is that it's starting about a 1/4 inch away from the edge, and it's getting closer gradually, so that when I get to this very corner right here, it's actually at the edge. So I'll show you actually sewing that on the machine. All right, so now I'm going to sew the darts. I've got the one that I put the dots on right here, and I have my machine on the straight stitch in the longest length. So I'm gonna drop my needle down, and I'm gonna back stitch on this side, but as I go off the point of the dart, I'm not going to back stitch. I'm gonna tie the strings off, and I'll show you that in a minute. And I'm just following this line, getting closer and closer to the edge. I guess I can zoom in for you. Sorry about the glare of that light. Okay, this pin was at my point right there. And I went right off the edge. So needle up. I'm gonna hold it here, make sure I give myself long enough strings. And so I'm going to tie these together in a double knot. And what I've ended up with is creating this nice curve, and it's not puckering too much here because it's right up to the edge. If I had not had that, so my camera turned off there, but I was just saying if I hadn't sewn off the very corner here, then it would have created more of a pucker, and that would create more of a like lumpy pointy boob situation in the finished product. So you definitely want to go right off the edge here, and tying these together instead of back stitching is just another safeguard against having a lump there. I didn't use the pen on this one. I'm just going to put my needle in and do it without the markings, but I do keep my pin up here near where I'm going to be tapering off, just so that I can make sure I'm aiming properly. I'm just looking under the foot here to make sure I'm putting it in about 1/4 inch away from the edge. All right, same as the other one. And I always do the lining first, just to have that practice before I do the main fabric, where it'll show more. Now that all 4 of my darts are complete and I tied these strings in double knots, I have put the lining and the main fabrics right side together and pinned along all the edges. I've clipped at the top of the straps because I'm not going to be sewing through those, and that's just going to help remind me to not do that. And then also I haven't pinned the bottom because that's going to be attached to the band later, and it doesn't need to be attached now. So I have all of my pins on the same side of the fabric except for this left edge, because I like to always start on a square edge and not like this. So I didn't want to put this into the serger, kind of harder to get a nice start there. So I will be doing this side facing up when I serge this edge, and then for the rest they all have the strap corner up at the top, so I'll serge these. Here we go. have all 4 edges sewn together. Or I guess it's 5. The center and then each side, the front and the armpit side. Here's my main and lining pieces joined right sides together and serged at all the seams here, leaving open the tops of the straps and the waistband, or the bottom where the waistband will go. So this is looking great, and for me the next step is to add some clear elastic, and I'm going to be doing that into the front crossover seams because I'm using it as a nursing top. And when you pull it down, you want it to have more recovery to bounce back nicely. So I'm only going to be putting it in these front 2, but it's optional to put them in all or in none. And you want to get your clear 1/4 inch elastic. I use Lastin, and the trick is to pre-stretch it and then not stretch it at all while you're attaching it. So it's going to be on my standard machine using a zigzag stitch. I'm going to just start up here and attach it, not stretching it at all the way down, and then I'll backstitch a bit at the end here and cut this elastic so it doesn't need to be pre-cut to size. And you want to do that on the main fabric, not on the lining fabric, and that's so that it will roll nicely to the lining and not show any of your lining when you're wearing it. So it's okay if some of the elastic hangs outside of the seam allowance, but the actual zigzag stitch needs to stay nicely inside your 1/4 inch seam allowance boundary. Here's the settings I'm using for my zigzag, 3 and 2. The hardest part for me is just dropping the needle down without smushing my fabric down into like the bobbin area, so I don't start too close to the edge of my fabric. Is nicely attached and it stretches nicely. It's just a little bit more firm than this side. All right, so we're reaching the finish line here. I have turned it so it's right sides out and I've pressed it. It's not necessary, but it does make it look a little nicer and it's easier to manipulate. So I'm going to choose how far I want my crossover. You can either do it the standard way where the point just goes right to the dart on both sides. So that would look like this size V. You could cross it over more, maybe like 1 inch over, and that would be a lot higher on your chest, leaving a smaller V. I like to have mine just barely past the dart, like this. So I'm going to baste this just between the darts to hold that in place. And one other thing I forgot to mention earlier, when I was sewing the front or the lining and the main together, I made sure that I had these seams going in opposite directions, folded in opposite directions. So it's less bulky. See, one is folded that way and one is folded the opposite way. Instead of if they were both folded the same way, it would be thicker. So this helps it be a smoother transition. Just wanted to point that out before I have this all closed up. Now that I have the crossover basted, the last two steps are attaching the straps and then putting the band on. So one more note about this crossover, it is going to be, no matter how far you decide to cross it over, it'll hang over equally on each side of the dart, and this center part will be nice and flat. Okay, so to do the crossover, you first look at the back of your main fabric and then you turn these inside out, like you point them down. So now you're looking like this. Then you take one strap and you put it through the opposite, and it's just nice and straight. Make sure it's not twisted. And then the result here, the reason you're doing this, is that now these are right sides together. So the mains are right sides together and the linings are right sides together. And that's how you're gonna have your strap looking good. So then you just do the same thing with the other one. It's crossed over and it goes through like that. For me, I actually don't like a crossover. So earlier when we were cutting out when I was cutting out the fabric, I did 2 inches shorter on the straps. So I didn't make any other adjustments besides cutting the straps 2 inches shorter, and then mine are just gonna go straight through on the same side. And I've made several of these bras, so that's how I know from trial and error that I needed to adjust the pattern. I showed you in the beginning my paper pattern. I added a little extra coverage right here. And then, I cut off 2 inches from the straps. And I also know that I like my crossover slightly past the dart. So that's all just trial and error. So it might take you a few bras to get it right. Okay, so now I have these here, and I usually serge this, but today I'm going to use my standard machine because I feel like that might help with the issue I've had before of it being a little bit bulky. I'll show you another one I've made before. See this? Like, that's not cute. It's totally fine because it's just a bra that I'm wearing and no one sees it, but I would like for the straps to, this one's a little better, but I'd like for them to just be the same width. I know it won't be perfect because one is inside the other, but I'm thinking maybe serging is partially causing this problem here. So for this one, I'm going to just use my standard machine and do a really narrow zigzag. Let's see how my zigzag idea worked out. Okay, that's among the better joins I've done on the straps, so maybe that is the better way for me to do it. All right, so the final step is the band. Let's see. Here I have my band cut out, So I'm going to sew down this line to make it a band. If you've watched my other videos, you know I'm a big fan of the ham hot method, where I would fold it again and just sew it once right here. But I just learned a new way to do it from Kimberly at Bow Button Fabrics. And actually this fabric is from Bow Button Fabrics. But anyway, so I'm going to just sew it once, and then I'll show you the trick that I just learned from her about how to complete the band. All right, so I've serged down this short edge of my band. Now I'm going to fold it in half, and then at the halfway mark, I'm going to trim. I'm going to cut through the first stitch, you know, the left and right needle. So the green thread is my left needle. I'm not going to cut through that, but I am going to cut through the white thread, which you can't see, but that's my right needle. Okay, hopefully I'm doing this right. So then the idea here is that when I am then folding my band like this, instead of it folding over here and being bulky, which is the reason I usually do the ham hot method, I have made this slit so that one can go one way and one the other. So then when it folds over, it's still just one seam layer thick. And that'll be a nice transition when I'm attaching it, sewing over the band. So I'm really happy with that. Thank you, Kimberly, and thanks for always having beautiful fabric also. So now I'm going to quarter and attach the band. So I have it here laying flat with the seam right there. So this is the halfway mark. And then when I turn the band and have the pin that I just marked directly on top of the seam, these are the quarter marks. And I like to have my band seam at the center back of the bra. So I'll put the one directly across from it at the center front. And that's going to be between the darts. So I have all the raw edges together here. And this is a lot of layers of fabric because I have the main and lining of both sides plus the band, which is 2 layers. So it's pretty thick. Then I will do the back center. And then I'm going to stretch the band. So I'm holding where I have my 2 pins. One is a clip, but you know what I mean. So I'm holding there, and I will stretch the band. And I can see it's going to be just in front of this side seam. And that's because the front and the back are not the exact same width. And similarly, it'll be just in front of this side seam here. and my little guy woke up, so I will be back in a bit to attach the band. All right, last step. So another trick I just learned from that video about bands from Kimberly at Bow Button Fabrics was to pull out these two strings a little bit, the needle threads, to make them just a little bit slack, and then that makes it easier when you're sliding your band under to start. Oh yeah, I see that. So these threads now had a little bit of slack to move out of the way, so I could really push the fabric all the way in easily. All right, so I'm going to drop down the needle, and I'm going to be trimming off the bare minimum as I go along. Make sure the foot is down. And I'm pulling between the needles that are here and the next upcoming pin. I'm going to be pulling it to be straight with the main fabric, but I'm not stretching the bra. I'm only stretching the band to fit the length of the bra. And as I'm getting to this first side seam, I want to make sure that, remember how up here I had them folded going opposite directions? I want to make sure those are lined up here, which I forgot about. So now I'm gonna have to peek inside. Feels lumpy here, so one of them is twisted. Definitely should have done this first, and I'll double check the other side before I get this close. Since my needles are in, I can lift my foot safely here. Okay. Oh yeah, it's this top one. I want it to be facing the other direction. Well, this is good. Hopefully this helps you all from making the same mistake. Okay. So now that is turned, so this is laying flat. Much better. So I need to make sure I drop that foot again. Go to the next upcoming needle or pin so that I can pull it right here. Okay, so we're about to start going over the super thick layer where we have all the crossover fronts. And this is the tip of one of my crossover fronts. You can see a little bit of elastic here. I want to make sure that's hanging down and I trim it off. Oh, I almost forgot to make these seams flat. I didn't do it right away like I said I was going to. Jeez. And it's twisted again. And here's the final result. My video cut out at the end there when I was finishing the band, but I just doubled over a little bit, crossed back over where I started, and then lifted the foot, turned, and went straight off the edge. And I'm going to use a crochet hook to tuck that tail into the seam allowance. So that is that. I hope this was helpful for you, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Please like this video if it was helpful and subscribe to my channel. Happy sewing!